There's something hidden underneath the Vatican City, and I'm not talking about the 20,000-year-old vampire queen. Vatican City is a 3-part comic written by superstar writer Mark Millar and illustrated by upcoming superstar Berg. Now let me ask you, have you ever read a story where halfway through you realize maybe you're reading something else? That happened to me twice in this book. And before I get into that, let me just very quickly set up the story. So Vatican City begins with the end of the world. Imagine vampires, millions of them, taking over all of the United States in under a day and most of Europe. In fact, all that's left of Europe is Vatican City. And that's where our story really starts. That's where we meet our protagonist, Guido, who I'm going to guess is an Italian. He wants to be a member of the Swiss Guard, having some former military training himself, but unfortunately he doesn't get to do that officially because that's when the vampire nation attacked. Murder, mayhem, senseless violence, parents getting torn away from their children. In typical Mark Millar fashion, it is on for young and old. But the most important part of the story comes at the end of this first issue when we learn what's buried underneath the Vatican City, what these vampires are here to come collect. And that is their vampire queen. In the second one, we learned that not only was the Vatican built to essentially encapsulate this queen, and they've been hoarding all sorts of forbidden artifacts and whatnot down in their vaults, but also that there was once a time 20,000 years ago when the vampires ruled over the earth. Gorgeous art here, by the way, from Per. Really amazing stuff. And that now those vampires think if they can resurrect their queen, they can bring about the second age of the vampire. And that's really the setup of the story. So that's what's hidden in the story? Not quite. What I'm referring to there is actually that, this story begins, like I said, at the end of the world. So really you're reading a prologue to a post-apocalyptic future story. If they get out of this at all, and there's lots of moments in this story where you wonder if it's even possible. And knowing Mark Millar, you never quite know what he's going to do. You have to be reading a story about what's going to happen after. Hundreds of millions of people are dead. Mark focuses in on the main character, Guido, but you can't help but think the whole time you're reading this, there's no going back after this. The world is irrevocably changed. The other thing I really want to talk about with this is the fact that, and this is stated by Mark Millar himself, this originated as a script or an idea or a pitch for a TV show. If you don't know, Mark sold his publishing company to Netflix. They own all these stories. And this comic book, these 3 comics definitely represent a script idea pitch for some sort of movie or TV show. You can feel that in the writing. It's incredibly fast-paced. Fast-paced to the point where sometimes you feel like you're getting script notes. And that isn't to say that there isn't a full story there. There is a full contained story in this, but it feels like at times you're only really getting the bullet points. It moves so quickly. And I've heard a lot of people complain, readers and creators alike, that they don't like reading comic books that are clearly pitches. But a lot of the time, the criticism about that comes down to they've clearly made a story with television considerations in mind, like budgets and scale and stuff. Well, in this story, it begins with the end of the world. We're talking millions of these vampires killing hundreds of millions of people. So in terms of scale and danger, you really couldn't get any bigger. And it also leads into the art too. Per has a very loose, unrefined style. It's so much more about movement, composition, gesture than it is about rendering, details, and anatomy that you would find in so many other American comic books. But if you think about it, this style really does lend itself very well to the scale of the story. We're talking, even in the Vatican City, thousands of people, huge crowds, huge scaled things, that once you get used to the fact that things are being rendered out very simply, then the art leads your imagination to fill in the scale. So for me, I wouldn't really complain that Vatican City is clearly a pitch in comic book form due to things like he's written a story that you could easily make on a small budget and sell it to Netflix. It's not so much that, it's that I think this is a really cool story. I really love books that get into alternate history timelines and everything. You know, we're talking 20,000 years of vampires ruling the world and it was all buried, and so many things that you think you know about history as a lie, all that stuff. I love that. But in this series, we're only scratching the surface. And I feel like with these comics, we're getting the bullet point version of that. And, you know, Mark probably has an idea of, okay, if this ever did become a movie, we could really flesh these things out and dial into the characters and dial into the history and dial into the story. But while it remains in comic book form, I feel like we're only getting the surface level. Now, I had a good time reading this. I enjoyed the story. But I want to see a little bit more, you know? And obviously, I'm a big fan of Pear's art, so I really thought it was a perfect match. And I want to congratulate Mark for taking a chance on an artist like Pear, who does do his own thing, goes his own way, and draws in a style that you wouldn't expect to be attached to someone like Mark Millar, because it really was a perfect fit for this story. Now, I've got the single issues here. I do believe this is now available in a trade, and it is well worth checking out. Maybe one day it will get made into a movie. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please subscribe. I'll see you on the next one. Bye.